Having closed the book on the crass commercialism of The Sims, let's move on to a game whose flavor text epitomizes the quality which all that mid-century modern junk was supposed to represent to begin with, namely, sophistication, in the cosmopolitan jet-set sense. A cosmopolitan is literally a citizen of the world, and so a truly cosmopolitan game should be one in which the action takes place across the whole planet, n'est-ce pas? And I don't mean a totally fictional planet, a la Earthbound or Chrono Trigger. I mean the real planet Earth that we all know and love. Well, not exactly that, but something quite close to it. Now, there are lots of video games that take place in lightly fictionalized versions of real countries, including some really wacky ones like Mystical Ninja starring Goemon for the N64. But I'm only aware of one such game whose setting covers the entire world, and that's Golden Sun for the Game Boy Advance. As a kid, I played lots of video games and read lots of books, but Golden Sun and its sequel, The Lost Age, were some of the first games I played that gave me the same feeling I got from reading books, the feeling that I was learning about something important. Not that I always was, of course, but we're talking about feelings here. Part of that stems from the fact that these are SNES-style RPGs, and thus have a more complicated story than, say, Yoshi's Island. But I also think this impression of complexity is bolstered by the quasi-historical richness of detail that their fictional setting of Weyard is swimming in. Weyard, whose name is probably just a variation on the word world, is a vast collection of continents, islands, and seas, and practically every one of the dozens of named places in it is based on some historical inspiration that occupies roughly the same position on the globe in real life, or at least where that place would have been in the distant past, given the shifts of Earth's tectonic plates. Starting at the grandest scale, with the planet's continental landmasses, the references tend to be more evocative than precise. The large northern continent where the story begins is called Angara, probably named after the capital of Turkey, Ankara, which was an important city under the rule of the ancient Greeks and later the Roman Empire. Its neighbor to the south is called Gondowin, almost certainly named after Gondwana, a supercontinent which is believed to have existed millions of years ago and included what is now Africa, South America, India, and much of the Middle East. Based on the cities and landmarks that appear in them, Angara is essentially Eurasia, and Gondowin is essentially Africa, and they're separated by a body of water known as the Karagal Sea. Karagal is Turkish for Black Sea, which is odd because this would be more comparable with the Mediterranean, but again, evocative, not precise. To the southeast lie the continents of Oceania, which resembles modern Australia, and Indra, which is based on India, and which literally collides with Gondowin after the end of the first game, a development that took millions of years to occur in actual geological time. Farther west across the ocean are Hesperia, Greek for western land, and originally used by the ancient Greeks to describe Italy, and Ateca, probably named after the Aztec civilization, which represent North and South America. There's also a frozen southern continent called Tandaria, basically Antarctica, an island called Izumo, which is the name of a historical kingdom in Japan, and a large island chain called the Apogee Islands, although the original Japanese name was Galapagos, and I'm sure you can guess what that means. Although the culture here is more like Easter Island, but that's splitting hairs. They're both off the coast of South America, after all. But as intriguing as all these names are, none of them counts as flavor text, because seeing them isn't optional. You have to visit all these places over the course of Golden Sun and The Lost Age, and the name is always displayed prominently as you enter each one. No, the reason why Golden Sun has a file in this cabinet is the presence of dozens of tantalizing text blurbs inside the houses that dot the maps of towns, major and minor, across the world of Weyard. Now, why would he refer to these blurbs as tantalizing, you may ask? Is he just being a bit of a fancy Francis to make it sound cooler than it is? Well, maybe I am a bit, but the real reason I use that word is because these tidbits of flavor text are all about one of my personal favorite travel topics: food. A sophisticated world traveler has a sophisticated palate, and Golden Sun tempts yours continually as you make your way across not Europe on your way to not Asia, then through not Africa, and eventually not everywhere else. In at least one house in every town, and often in two, there'll be a stove blazing away with something taste-tempting inside it, and every time you see a stove, the main character has the option of taking a peek at what's cooking and commenting on it. This is especially interesting in Golden Sun because most of the time your main character doesn't talk, period. Like Chrono Trigger, these games go heavy on the silent protagonist trope, and even though your character obviously must be talking in some scenes, you never actually get to hear what he says. This gets really weird in the second game, where Isaac, the protagonist of the first game, is now an NPC, and does most of the talking for his team. And it's like, hang on, you have a personality? Where did all this come from? Not to mention that Felix, your protagonist in The Lost Age, suddenly stops talking the instant you take control of him, when he'd been perfectly capable of expressing himself in the first game. But, genre conventions. So clearly, what these two games are saying is that epical, world-shattering events don't necessarily merit a comment from our protagonist. But when some rando is cooking seafood stew with cream and just a pinch of pepper, that is breaking news and demands a response. I knew there was a reason I loved these games. So rather than analyze the stories proper of the Golden Sun franchise, or even rattling off all the different historical references embedded in its setting, let's just have a little culinary chat in the style of a cookbook, taking as reference points several of the tastiest descriptions you find inside the ovens of Wayard. I still do want to talk about other aspects of these games, by the way, but I think I'll save that for a video where I can do the whole thing justice, rather than crowbarring it into this series. We're here for flavor right now, not substance, and I can make a substantial meal out of the plot of Golden Sun any day. So, is everybody hungry? Well, you will be soon. Let's get started with something simple yet sumptuous. They're making stir-fry. The cabbage looks strangely appetizing. This is from Xi'an, a town in eastern Angara that the party reaches about halfway through Golden Sun. It's named after the real Chinese city of Xi'an, and like its namesake, it marks the beginning of the Silk Road that the party travels along for most of the second half of the game. This is one of the prettier locations in Golden Sun, and I always enjoyed my time here, although not much happens in the story department. Naturally, the food here is being stir-fried, a classic Chinese cooking technique which gives the cook a lot of temperature control while saving on valuable cooking oil. The technique is first mentioned in a Chinese agricultural textbook from the 6th century AD, which also includes a recipe for scrambled eggs. But it didn't get really popular until the Qing dynasty, when China's major cities became crowded and rich enough to generate a skyrocketing demand for tasty fast food. And I have to say, referring to stir-fried cabbage as strangely appetizing is dead-on accurate. I'm not much of a cabbage guy, but you stir-fry it and I'll eat that for days on end. If you've ever had fried rice, you're quite familiar with stir-frying's power to make inherently dull ingredients taste amazing. It's probably the greatest invention that China ever gave to the world. You know, besides printing and gunpowder and other boring junk like that. Next up, we have a dish from the town of Altan, high in the mountains northwest of Xi'an. Altan is likely named after the Altai mountain range in western Mongolia, which is believed to be the original homeland of the Turks, who went on to occupy Anatolia, now called Turkey. He's making shrimp in a chili sauce. The shrimp looks so scrumptious. My mouth is watering. Now this is actually quite an odd choice. Mongolia is completely landlocked, and most of it is desert, although admittedly the mountain areas have many lakes and rivers. Freshwater fish aren't unusual in Mongolian cuisine, but shrimp? Shrimp tend to be eaten in places with lots of coastline, like China and Japan. There is a dish called Mongolian shrimp, but it's from Taiwan. The Mongolian adjective just refers to the sauce, and based on the description, this dish doesn't even use that. I would guess that this is really just more Chinese food, which is fine by me, honestly. The chili sauce is what really makes this interesting. As you may know, chili peppers are indigenous to the Americas and didn't become part of the cuisine of Asia until European traders brought them there in the late 17th century. Just like peanuts in Thai food and paprika in Hungary, this is a classic ingredient that doesn't actually come from the country it's associated with, and has only been a big deal there for a relatively short time. In China, peppers were mostly used by peasants as a substitute for the rare and delicious native spices, like Sichuan peppercorns, that the rich had enjoyed for centuries. Even as late as the mid-20th century, many Chinese people, especially the wealthy ones, had never tasted a chili pepper. Well, that was their loss. I can think of few ingredients that are more versatile and more exciting to cook with than chilies. I love them so much that I'm willing to forgive the writers of this game for putting them in the wrong geographic location. They probably just couldn't resist. Moving along the Silk Road past the Lamakan Desert, based on the real-life Taklamakan Desert, we make our way back to western Angara and the city of Camelot. Geographically, this bustling commercial center occupies roughly the same space as the ancient city of Kare in modern Turkey, from which it probably gets its name. Although I suspect that there's also some influence from the French port town of Calais, which it resembles visually to some extent. More so than it does an ancient desert ruin, that's for sure. It's a Calais salad with cucumber and yogurt. I can't imagine what it tastes like. Even though the game refers to this as a salad, the word sauce might be a better fit. Although, fun word fact, the words salad and sauce come from the same Latin root. The Turkish word for this is çaçık, but it's better known by the Greek name tzatziki, which you ought to know if you've ever had a decent gyro. It's made from strained yogurt, cucumber, garlic, salt, olive oil, and vinegar. and often flavored with lemon, mint, dill, or parsley. Tzatziki is served lots of different ways, including on its own or with pita as an appetizer, or meze, as a side dish or a cold soup, and most familiarly to Americans, slathered on top of a perfectly rotisseried pile of souvlaki or gyro meat. It's kind of like the Mediterranean equivalent of ranch dressing, and just like ranch dressing, there's a big difference between good tzatziki and mediocre tzatziki. The ordinary mass-produced stuff has a nice creamy texture, but it's mostly flavorless and could never stand on its own the way it often does in Greece and Turkey. Really good tzatziki is completely different. It's tart and tangy, almost spicy in fact, with crunchy bits of cucumber refreshing your taste buds as you eat it. Well-made tzatziki is so tasty that you won't have to worry about having half a bowl of the stuff left over at the end of the meal. What you will worry about is the fact that you consumed an entire bowl by yourself and there's still 10 pita wedges left. And speaking of things being left over, we've still got a lot of food to discuss, so I must reluctantly say taleme argotera to my favorite sauce and move on. Next up is possibly the most pivotal location in the whole two-game saga, the magnificent city of Tolbi on the north shore of Gondwan. Tolbi is a variation on Trevi, as in the Trevi Fountain in the center of Rome, and naturally this continent-spanning metropolis is the equivalent of the real-life Roman Empire, although its geographic location puts it closer to Alexandria or Carthage, which may be an allusion to the economic importance of Rome's North African possessions. This was the breadbasket of the empire, and Egypt itself was the wealthiest Roman province outside of Italy. Befitting its colossal status, Tolbi is the only place in the series with a whopping 3 meals being prepared within it. 2 of these are pasta dishes, naturally, but the third is the one I want to focus on. She's making the world-renowned Tolbi pizza. The scent of cheese. Oh no, something's burning. The ancient Romans did not actually have pizza, in no small part because pizza traditionally uses tomato sauce, and the ancient Romans never even saw a tomato, since it's a New World fruit. But what they did have is pizza crust, since that's just flatbread, and practically every human being has had flatbread for tens of thousands of years. The ancient Romans liked to put sweet toppings on their flatbread, like honey and figs, and they also made something called libum out of bread and cheese, sort of like modern cheesecake, but actually not much. The oldest reference to pizza as a kind of food is in a Latin manuscript from the year 997 AD, which records the tax obligations of the tenant of a large property in the town of Gaeta, then part of the Byzantine Empire. It specifically states that the tenant must give duodecim pizzae, i.e. 12 pizzas, to the Bishop of Gaeta every Christmas day, and another 12 on Easter. You heard me correctly. There is an official legal document in Latin from the first millennium saying that some guy has to deliver a bunch of pizzas on Christmas. I love history. It's an open question where the word pizza comes from, but the simplest explanation is that it's just a variation on pita. They are both kinds of flatbread, after all. The modern dish didn't appear until the 1700s, but I think we all know that it's the 20th century when its popularity really exploded, producing the vast and occasionally terrifying variety of styles and toppings that exist now. But if you ever have the chance to go to Naples and sample the pizza at its source, do yourself a favor and get at least one like the kind mentioned in Golden Sun, with nothing on it but bread, olive oil, and cheese. Fancy toppings are great, but a simple pizza cooked to perfection is heavenly and does not require any toppings to stand out. The crust should be slightly chewy, and the cheese should stretch just a little when you bite into it without being rubbery. And the taste? Trust me, you'll know it when you get it. Let's just say that Neapolitan-style pizza is thin enough that you can eat a whole pizza by yourself, and that's good, because even if you technically couldn't, you still would. But we haven't got time to sit around and chew the pizza all day. Let's move on to the last, for now, of our mouth-watering metafictional meals, this time located in the town of Lalivero, also on the north coast of Gondwan and just outside the Venus Lighthouse where the end of Golden Sun takes place. Lalivero's architecture is clearly inspired by the rock-cut churches of the real Ethiopian town of Lalibela, from which it also takes its name. Christianity in Eastern Africa has a long history, and these buildings are a remarkable monument to the fervor and artistic expressiveness that it inspired. They're also a bit intimidating, much like the Venus Lighthouse, which dwarfs Bobby's half-finished attempt to parallel it. One of the things I love about Golden Sun is that its worldwide scope allows it to draw influences from all kinds of places that fiction doesn't normally touch, the Horn of Africa being a perfect example. This is a fascinating part of the world, and one that often gets missed in history classes. I didn't know anything about it when I first played Golden Sun, just like Angkor Wat and the caves of Altamira, and many other places that its heroes visit over the course of 2 games. But that's enough talking about buildings. Let's talk about food. She's frying freshwater fish from the river. The fish is fried crispy. You could even eat the bones. Now, African cooks are certainly no strangers to fish, including fish fried to a crisp. But given the religious undertones of Lalavero's namesake, I'm inclined to suspect that this is a reference to a popular dish served in Galilee, part of modern Israel and Lebanon. St. Peter's fish. In the Gospel of Matthew, there's a story about two tax collectors demanding that Jesus and Peter pay a temple tax, and Jesus tells Peter to catch a fish in the Sea of Galilee that will have a coin in its mouth, and to use that coin to pay the tax. It's an interesting combination of a miracle and a render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's solution, and it seems to have inspired local restaurateurs quite a bit. They would take the local tilapia living in the Sea of Galilee, fry them up whole, and call the dish St. Peter's fish, as if it were the same fish caught by Peter in the Bible. Sounds a little hokey, I know, but apparently it was delicious, and it became a favorite food of the many pilgrims who visited Galilee. So much so that apparently the sea got overfished like crazy. Modern versions of the dish generally use farm-grown tilapia. I've never eaten a whole fish myself, but fried fish in general is quite a tempting treat, and the crispier, the better. Haddock is my favorite, but I can't get it in stores where I live, so I generally have to make do with cod. Even when it's been frozen, good fried whitefish has a delicate, flaky texture that's very appetizing, and a smell that's even more so. Fish fries are still popular community events in the United States, and they're strongly associated with religion, since devout Christians don't eat red meat during Lent or on Fridays throughout the year. Golden Sun isn't a particularly religious-themed game, even in the bizarre way that some RPGs like Final Fantasy VII are, but it conveys a lot of that feeling of numinous spirituality through its design and atmosphere. There's magic in this world, even if there isn't an explicitly named deity. It's the same kind of magic that's used every day to transmute base ingredients into the delicious alchemy that steams out of kitchens all over the world. And the same kind that game designers use, to take decades-old game mechanics and tropes and whip them up into something so clever and appealing that you hardly notice how simple it all is at heart. Golden Sun is not a particularly innovative game. It looks a lot like Ogre Battle 64, it plays a lot like Breath of Fire, and it cribs most of its setting details from actual real-world history. But just like in cooking, the whole is more than a mere sum of its parts. Few games have ever had the nerve to retell history and expect players to enjoy it as fiction, but Golden Sun did, and it worked. Few games have put so much work into emphasizing setting details, rather than shoving all the cleverness into mandatory dialogue segments, but Golden Sun did, and ended up as something truly unique. This is a very flavorful game, and I'm not done talking about its world or its food. It's just that I have to take a break now and work on something else for a while, for one simple reason. This game is making me way too hungry.